Welcome to In-Silico Trials Real Impact, the In-Silico UK podcast that's revolutionizing the way we think about medical innovation. I'm Professor Alejandro Frangi from the University of Manchester, and I'll be your guide through this fascinating world of in-silico technologies. In each episode, we'll dive into cutting-edge research and groundbreaking news that are shaping the future of medical product development and regulation. From computational modeling to simulated clinical trials, we are exploring how digital approaches are transforming healthcare, making it safer, more efficient, more equitable, and incredibly precise. So, whether you're a researcher, regulator, a member of the public, or a patient representative, or simply curious about the future of medicine, tune in as we unravel the complex world of in-silico methods and their real-world impact. Get ready to discover how computer-simulated trials are leading to very real breakthroughs in patient care. In-Silico Trials Real Impact, where algorithms and data are saving lives. Let's begin.
We all know how crucial clinical trials are, especially when it comes to our kids. But, when you're facing these really challenging conditions, finding enough participants to get reliable answers, well, it can feel like hitting a brick wall sometimes.
It really can.
I mean, take necrotizing enterocolitis in preterm infants. It's a devastating illness, right?
Oh.
And yet, a big analysis of probiotic trials for this found that the median number of babies enrolled across like 56 different studies was only 149.
Just 149. Wow, that's tiny for getting solid answers.
Exactly. Only a tiny fraction had what you'd really call a good sample size. Even the biggest study had just over 1,300 babies. So it's hardly surprising that so many reviews end up saying, look, we just need more robust evidence.
Yeah, that's precisely the issue we run into time and again. These underpowered studies, they leave us with uncertainty. And in pediatrics, especially with rare conditions or, conditions that present really differently in different kids, the traditional randomized trial, it can be slow, it's costly.
And potentially risky for the kids involved.
Right. It might expose vulnerable children to treatments without a clear benefit yet. So it really makes you ask, can we use all this digital power we have now to find, new ways to do pediatric research?
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today.
Yeah.
This really exciting potential of using virtual patient data to maybe revolutionize how we approach clinical trials for children.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack three really interesting alternatives: digital twins, synthetic patient data, and these things called in-silico trials.
And these aren't just like pie-in-the-sky ideas anymore. They represent real, tangible shifts in how we might make medical research faster and more personalized, especially for our youngest patients.
Okay, so before we get sort of too deep into the weeds, can we get a quick rundown? What does each of these actually mean in simple terms?
Sure. So think of a digital twin as a highly detailed, almost like a living digital copy of an individual patient. It's constantly updated with their specific health information.
Okay, a digital copy.
Then you've got synthetic patient data. That's where we use artificial intelligence, AI, to generate completely new data sets that look and act like real patient data, but without using any actual personal info. So privacy is key there.
Right, generated data.
And finally, in-silico trials. These are basically clinical trials run entirely on computers using complex simulations and models.
Got it. So our goal today is really to understand how these virtual tools could maybe transform pediatric research, make it faster, perhaps safer, more tailored to the individual child's needs. It's about exploring the huge possibilities here.
Absolutely. It's about really grasping that transformative potential and these innovative approaches that are kind of bubbling up right now.
All right, let's kick things off with digital twins then. This sounds, straight out of science fiction. When you talk about a digital twin of a patient, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, it does have that sci-fi ring to it.
Yeah.
But while the term digital twin can be used pretty broadly when we talk about it in healthcare, specifically for patients, a really helpful way to think about it comes from Drummond and Gonsard. They define it as like a viewable digital replica of a patient.
Viewable.
Yeah, or even just a specific organ or system inside them. And this replica contains a massive amount of their unique medical data. The really crucial thing about this definition is how focused it is on the individual. It's not about general populations. It's super specific, highly personalized.
Okay, so it's like a really, really detailed digital avatar for one specific patient. How would you then use that in something like a clinical trial?
Well, one of the most promising uses is in creating what people are calling synthetic control arms.
Synthetic controls.
Yeah. So instead of enrolling a whole group of real patients to get a placebo or the standard treatment, you could potentially use the digital twins of similar patients. Use them to predict what their outcomes would likely have been without the new drug or intervention. This could, really slash the costs of traditional trials and help us get those bigger, more effective sample sizes we talked about. The key difference from just using old data is that these predictions come from models built for individual virtual patients.
That's a really fascinating idea. So a virtual control group instead of a real one. What are the main upsides of using digital twins like this, especially when we're talking about kids?
Well, think back to those challenges we mentioned at the start, right? Small numbers, diversity.
Yeah, the sample size issue.
Exactly. Digital twins could really speed up the trial process because you might not need to recruit quite as many real-world participants for the control group. They also open the door for much more personalized treatments and ways to manage disease because you have this incredibly detailed digital picture of each patient.
Right.
And for those really diverse populations like preterm infants, a baby born at 23 weeks is just physiologically worlds apart from one born at 32 weeks, right?
Totally
Digital twins can capture that individual biological variation in a way that traditional trials often, struggle with. So using digital twins could directly tackle that problem of small sample sizes, especially in rare pediatric conditions.
It's almost like having a sort of data-powered crystal ball for each individual patient.
Yeah, in a way, yes. A digital twin acts as what some people call a mirror object. You can run virtual simulations on it, do predictive analysis, test out different treatment scenarios, all in this digital space. And that could be super valuable in pediatrics because, kids can always tell you exactly how they're feeling or reacting to a treatment like an adult can. Their digital twin might give us those critical insights.
This sounds incredibly sophisticated. Are there, different types of these patient-specific digital twins?
Yes, Drummond and Gonsard talk about two main kinds. First, there are what they call simulated patient digital twins. Yeah, these are usually built based on a one-time assessment of the patient. Then computational modeling is used to create this digital representation. You can then use that model to forecast outcomes in different hypothetical situations or maybe compare different treatment options virtually.
Okay, like a snapshot model. And the second type?
The second type is the monitoring patient digital twin. These are much more focused on continuous tracking. They pull together aggregated health data over time and use complex analytics. The goal here is to constantly predict potential risks and health outcomes, feeding back information to help optimize the patient's ongoing medical care.
Okay, that makes sense. One is more for specific what-if scenarios, and the other is like a dynamic ongoing digital health tracker.
Yes.
Have we actually seen this being used with kids yet? Are there real-world examples?
Absolutely. There's some really pioneering work happening. For example, Gonsard and colleagues did a survey asking children with asthma about a potential digital twin system. This system would continuously collect data from their home environment, think air quality, maybe activity levels, and then use AI to give real-time advice for managing their asthma. What was really interesting was that over half the kids said they'd be willing to use it if it was as good as their current care.
Wow.
And get this, up to 93% said they'd use it if it turned out to be even better than their current care.
That shows a real openness from young patients themselves, doesn't it? Any other cool examples?
Yeah, another really fascinating one comes from Sizemore and colleagues just recently in 2024. They used generative AI to create a digital twin of the infant microbiome.
Microbiome, like the gut bacteria.
Exactly. They took fecal samples from preterm infants in the NICU and used this AI tool called QNet. It allowed them to simulate and predict how the incredibly complex interactions between all the different bacteria in the gut would change over time for each baby. It gives this dynamic, personalized view of something so intricate, especially in these very vulnerable newborns.
That's incredible, a digital twin of something as complex as the microbiome.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And then there's something called 2WIN-GPT, developed by Wang and colleagues. This uses large language models, kind of like the tech behind ChatGPT, but they've specifically fine-tuned these models using huge amounts of clinical trial data.
Okay.
The idea is to generate personalized digital twins just by processing electronic health records. Then you can simulate patient-specific scenarios, maybe even predict potential future health problems.
So while we might not be seeing entire clinical trials run purely with digital twins just yet, it sounds like the groundwork, the basic science, is definitely being laid.
Precisely. And it's not just happening in a few isolated labs either. There's a real growing global momentum around digital twin tech for clinical research. We're seeing consortia and dedicated research centers popping up all over the place. The Swedish Digital Twin Consortium, the Human Digital Twin One Planet Research Center in the Netherlands, the EMPA Center in Switzerland, the DigiPredict Consortium in Europe, the Living Heart Project, even things like the COVID-19 Long Hauler Advocacy Project are exploring this. It really shows significant international interest and investment.
Okay, so digital twins are these super personalized, data-packed virtual copies. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about synthetic patient data. How is that different?
Right, so synthetic patient data takes a different approach. It moves away from creating a direct replica of one specific person. Instead, it uses AI, particularly these sophisticated generative AI models, to produce completely new data sets that just look and behave like real-world patient data.
So it's not based on any single real person's information at all?
Exactly. And it's worth noting there isn't actually one single universally agreed-upon definition of synthetic data yet. That can sometimes cause, issues with making sure research can be reproduced or is transparent.
Yeah.
But a pretty useful working definition came from the Royal Society and the Alan Turing Institute. They basically describe it as data generated by a specific purpose-built mathematical model or algorithm, and it's designed specifically to help solve certain data science tasks. Essentially, these smart algorithms learn the underlying patterns in real data and then create brand new data points that follow those same patterns.
Okay, so the AI is basically making data that looks real, feels real, but isn't actually connected to any individual person. What's the main advantage of doing that?
Well, because this data is computer-generated based on existing data sets and it's designed to mimic those real-world patterns, it can be incredibly valuable for medical research. And it completely sidesteps the need to access sensitive personal health information.
Ah, the privacy angle again.
Right. Researchers can potentially train their machine learning models on the synthetic data first. Let the models learn the important patterns and relationships before they ever touch real patient data. This could really help with privacy concerns and also just speed up the development process.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah, from both privacy and maybe efficiency standpoints.
Yeah.
Are we seeing examples of this synthetic data being used in pediatric research yet?
Well, interestingly, based on what's out there in the published research right now, there don't seem to be many, if any, well-documented examples of synthetic data being directly used in pediatric clinical research specifically. It's still a pretty new frontier, especially when you narrow it down to kids' health.
But it is being used in studies with adults.
Oh, yes, definitely. For example, in Alzheimer's research, some investigators took data from the placebo groups of old clinical trials and observational studies, a really big, real-world data set with thousands of patients.
Yeah.
They fed all this data into these advanced generative machine learning models. The AI then created synthetic clinical records. And these synthetic records could then be used to forecast how the disease might progress in different types of patients. The forecasts actually lined up reasonably well with what happens in the real world.
So it's almost like creating a virtual population that researchers can study without needing real people for every step.
Exactly. And thinking about rare diseases again, where patient numbers are often tiny and data is really sparse, generative synthetic data could be hugely helpful. It can augment the real-world evidence we do have.
Right.
For instance, in adults with a rare blood disorder called myelodysplasia, researchers use something called generative adversarial networks. GANs, for short.
GANs.
Yeah, they're a type of AI that's particularly good at creating realistic synthetic data. They use these GANs to make synthetic data that mimicked the clinical details, the genomic info, the treatments, and the outcomes of real patients with myelodysplasia.
That really does sound like it could be a game changer for studying conditions where you just can't find enough patients for a traditional study.
Absolutely. Synthetic data holds huge promise for cracking that problem of low sample sizes in many RCTs. It could offer a cheaper, faster way to get initial research results. But, and this is but it's absolutely crucial that this synthetic data has high fidelity.
Fidelity, meaning?
Meaning it's high quality and it accurately reflects the complexities and variations of the real patient population. It also needs to capture the diversity within that population, and it has to be generalizable, meaning it applies to the specific pediatric group or condition you're actually studying. Plus, researchers have to be super careful about checking for and dealing with any biases that might have been lurking in the original data used to train the AI.
Okay, so the quality and representativeness of the synthetic data are absolutely key.
Got it.
Right. So we've covered digital twins, those individual virtual copies, and synthetic data, the AI-generated data sets. Now let's dive into in silico trials. This sounds like taking the whole clinical trial idea and just doing it on a computer.
That's pretty much spot on, yeah. An in-silico trial is a clinical trial conducted entirely digitally using sophisticated computer simulations and modeling. It has the potential to just completely bypass all the challenges around recruiting patients.
Wow.
And it could even be used to model both the treatment group and the control group in a study.
Entirely virtual trials. That feels like a massive leap. Can you give us some actual examples where this has worked?
Yes, definitely. A really notable one is the virtual imaging clinical trial for regulatory evaluation study, bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
In that study, researchers used computer-simulated images from thousands of virtual patients to compare how well standard digital mammography worked versus a newer technique called digital breast tomosynthesis for finding breast lesions.
Okay, comparing imaging techniques virtually.
Exactly. And when they compared the results from their in silico trial to the results from a big, real clinical trial involving hundreds of actual women, they found a really strong correlation. It helped confirm that the tomosynthesis method was superior.
That's a really powerful validation, isn't it? A completely virtual trial getting similar results to a real-world one.
It is. And here's another compelling example, and this one's directly relevant to kids. It was an in silico trial looking at using bone morphogenetic protein for a condition called congenital pseudoarthrosis of the tibia.
Okay, what's that?
It's a very rare bone condition that affects children. By using virtual patients in their computer simulations, the study suggested that this protein treatment might be beneficial. It really highlights how in silico trials could be particularly useful for studying these ultra-rare diseases, where doing a traditional trial is just incredibly difficult because there are so few patients.
So it sounds like these in silico trials might be especially good for things like evaluating medical devices or maybe specific interventions, particularly when finding enough patients is the main roadblock.
Precisely. And they're increasingly seen as a really valuable complement to traditional clinical trials, not necessarily a total replacement yet. They offer a cost-effective way to get initial insights, test hypotheses, and maybe help refine the design of later real-world studies.
Okay, so we've looked at digital twins, synthetic data, and in silico trials one by one. If we zoom out now, what are the sort of big picture advantages of using these kinds of virtual patient data approaches in pediatric clinical trials overall?
Well, the potential advantages are really quite significant, I think. First and foremost, it could mean fewer children being exposed to interventions that might turn out to be ineffective or even carry unexpected risks.
That's huge.
It really is. It also has the potential to dramatically shorten the time it takes to run trials. That means we could figure out if new treatments are safe and effective much faster, which could lead to quicker drug approvals. And this could also pave the way for more personalized treatment strategies, maybe even at a lower cost overall.
And going back to that initial problem, we talked about the underpowered study.
Exactly. By allowing for much larger virtual sample sizes, these methods can significantly boost our power, our ability to actually detect meaningful differences between a treatment and a control. That gives us potentially much higher certainty in the evidence we gather.
Right.
Plus, you have the cost savings associated with recruiting and managing real participants that can be substantially reduced.
It sounds like it could also just open up completely new ways to even design trials in the first place.
Absolutely. Researchers could find it much easier to explore, say, multiple different variations of a treatment, or look into continuous monitoring approaches, or even implement adaptive trials that can be adjusted on the fly based on the virtual data coming in. And we'd likely see improvements in both the quality and the sheer quantity of data we can collect.
We are seeing some of this happening in the adult medicine world too, right? This idea of using synthetic control arms to speed things up.
Yes, definitely. There have been successful examples using synthetic controls to fast-track evaluations of drugs for things like certain cancers, hepatitis C, and rheumatoid arthritis in adults. Even big pharma companies like AstraZeneca are actively looking into using synthetic patient records to try and cut drug development costs and timelines.
Interesting.
And you're even seeing specialized companies pop up, like Unlearn AI, that specifically offer support to help optimize clinical trials using virtual patient data.
But as you mentioned earlier, these amazing technologies haven't really filtered down widely into pediatric trials just yet. What's the main holdup there?
That's the million-dollar question, really. While the potential seems clear, we still need more solid research that directly compares the results you get from virtual patient data with what you see in real-world control groups, specifically in kids.
Yeah.
We need to build up a really strong level of confidence that these virtual methods accurately reflect how actual child patients respond to treatments and what their characteristics are.
Okay. This all sounds incredibly innovative, almost futuristic, but it must also raise some big questions about, well, how it's all regulated. What's the current regulatory picture look like?
That's a critical piece. In the U.S., it's primarily the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. They oversee digital health tech, and they generally classify these tools as medical devices, depending on what they're intended to do.
Right.
The FDA does have some leeway, they call it enforcement discretion, for things they consider low risk. And they've actually set up a specific digital health center of excellence to help guide and encourage innovation in this space. Importantly, the FDA is actively promoting the use of in-silico modeling and simulation, especially for medical devices, and they've even put out specific guidance documents on how to use computational modeling in development.
Okay, so the FDA is engaged. What about in Europe? Is it similar?
It's a bit different in Europe. The EU recently brought in its Artificial Intelligence Act that actually just came into effect in August 2024. It's a really broad law covering AI systems across many sectors, and that definitely includes AI-powered digital health tools.
Okay, a dedicated AI Act.
Yeah, and it has a staggered rollout plan. It's designed to work alongside the existing health-specific rules like the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, and the rules for in vitro diagnostics, IVDR. So navigating the regulatory pathway for digital health AI in Europe might be, well, a bit more complex, involving multiple layers of rules.
It really sounds like close collaboration between all the different players, the tech people, the researchers, the doctors, the regulators, is going to be absolutely essential for this to work well.
Absolutely. Making effective and safe progress here really demands strong partnerships. You need the AI and computation experts talking to the medical researchers, the healthcare providers, the hospitals and universities, and crucially, the regulatory bodies like the FDA and their European counterparts working together right from the start.
Makes sense. Now, of course, with any exciting new technology, there are always downsides or limitations to think about. What are some of the key ones we need to keep front of mind when we're talking about virtual patient data?
You're absolutely right. These technologies are still pretty early in terms of widespread use, and there are definitely several important things to consider. One big challenge is just validating how accurate and reliable synthetic data actually is.
Right, the fidelity issue you mentioned.
Exactly. How do we make absolutely sure it truly reflects the real diversity of patient populations? We need to be so careful not to accidentally introduce biases or end up with results that are misleading because the synthetic data wasn't quite right.
Yeah, that seems fundamental. If the input data or the model is biased, the output will be too. What else is a major limitation?
Well, another key one is that virtual patient data, at least as it stands now, generally can't predict totally new adverse events. You know, those unexpected side effects or complications that just haven't been seen or reported in the real-world data that was used to train the AI models in the first place.
Ah, okay. It can only model what's known.
Pretty much. Human biology is just incredibly complex, and we can't simulate every single possible interaction or outcome of a new drug or intervention, especially things that are rare or completely unexpected.
Also, what about the placebo effect? That's a real phenomenon in trials. How does that fit in with virtual controls?
That's a really important point. In a purely in silico trial, or one using a synthetic control arm generated from data, you don't have a placebo effect in that control group. But we know from countless studies that the placebo effect can have a genuine, measurable impact on patient outcomes in real clinical trials. How you account for that difference is a significant methodological challenge.
Yeah, that's tricky. And beyond the technical stuff, there must be ethical considerations too, especially with kids' data.
Huge ethical considerations. We really need new ethical frameworks specifically for this area, built on principles like non-maleficence, doing no harm justice, accountability, and respect for autonomy, which includes privacy, of course.
And children are considered a vulnerable population in research anyway, right? They
Mhm.
can't consent for themselves.
Exactly. Parents or guardians provide consent, and they understandably have concerns about data security and potential leaks of their child's sensitive health information. So researchers really need to adopt new governance structures and follow regulations strictly when it comes to patient data privacy and ownership. We need to ensure these digital innovations are safe and sustainable. And we also need to figure out things like cost and reimbursement strategies eventually.
There's also maybe a risk of dehumanization if everything becomes data and models.
That is a substantial concern that people raise. If there's less face-to-face interaction because we're relying more on digital tools, could that erode the trust between patients, families, and healthcare professionals? It's something we need to be mindful of.
And the big one, data security. How do you protect all this sensitive digital health data?
That's probably the major operational risk, maintaining patient data privacy and preventing security breaches. Mitigation strategies are crucial. Things like robust data protection measures, thorough anonymization where possible, and building systems using privacy by design principles from the ground up.
What about patient control over their own data? Is that clear?
It's often quite unclear right now. How much control do patients or their families have over how their digital health data is shared and used? We need to formalize the ethical and legal aspects around potential privacy loss if there is a data breach.
And just staying compliant with all the regulations we talked about must be complex too.
Definitely. There's always a risk of non-compliance, especially as regulations evolve. That's why engaging with regulatory bodies early and often is so important. One study actually mapped out major ethical risks associated with digital twins across the whole life cycle: data collection, management, analysis, and how the information is ultimately used.
Wow, okay. So lots of potential pitfalls. But we have to balance those risks against the potential benefits, right? Like maybe fewer kids needing to be in a control group getting a placebo.
Exactly. That's the potential upside, reducing the likelihood of assigning children to control interventions if virtual patients can reliably fill that role. And of course, the potential to speed up decisions on whether new therapies are safe and effective for kids. It's a complex balance.
Is there any formal guidance yet on things like consent, specifically for these kinds of virtual patient technologies in pediatric trials?
That's another gap. Currently, there aren't really formal instructions specifically addressing consent for digital health tech related to virtual patients in pediatric trials. For instance, guidance from the NIH, the National Institutes of Health in the US, tends to focus more on things like wearable technology data, not so much on the AI and simulation aspects we've been discussing.
We've had a really insightful discussion today covering a lot of ground. Just to sort of wrap things up, what are the main takeaways you think we should leave our listeners with?
I think the key thing is that the potential for digital twins, synthetic patient data, and in-silico trials to really significantly enhance pediatric clinical trials is huge. They offer these really exciting possibilities for boosting sample size, cutting costs, and getting crucial research results much faster.
But, and it's a big but, it's not going to be a simple switch or an easy transition.
Exactly. While the promise of these technologies is immense, it's absolutely vital that we tackle the technical hurdles carefully, alongside all those crucial ethical, regulatory, and data privacy considerations. Taking a really responsible approach is going to be essential if we want to see these tools widely and safely adopted in pediatric research.
Absolutely. And on that note, maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. With the incredible pace of change we're seeing in AI and digital health, how might the very definition of what a clinical trial participant is evolve in the years to come? And what could that mean for how we understand medical evidence and maybe even for the patient experience itself? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.